Hi everyone, we'll be joining soon. On behalf of TESOL Kuwait, let me welcome you to our 2023 conference. And with us today is Ms. Sarah Ashkanani, who's going to talk about approaching Orientalism, the West, through Arab female eyes. All right. Ms. Sarah Ashkanani is an English language instructor in the Australian University, teaching both general English and ESP, English for engineering and English for air traffic controllers. She also taught at the Arab Open University preliminary and literature courses. She has a BA in English language and literature and an MA in comparative literature, both issued by Kuwait University. So please let us welcome Ms. Sarah. Sorry? It's okay, I did it, yes. All right, so let's welcome Ms. Sarah, as I was saying, and wish her the best of luck with her presentation.
Can everybody hear me now? I had the feeling this would happen. Oh no, it says the screen is muted. Yeah. No, I know actually the mic is working, but people were hearing echoes. And when I turn this off, they can't hear.
Speakers inside the room.
I don't. Now that you're this, I don't know.
Can you try opening it just so for me to see where the
Sure.
problem is?
But Veronica, is my screen shared or not anymore? Share it again. No, it's shared. Veronica. It says stop sharing, which means it's on share. So are they commenting on the sound now? Can they hear me? The mic is on and there's no echo, so. They can't, okay, great. All good. Thank you. Yeah, let me just. Oh, sorry if the sound is being muffled. I'm only adjusting the mic. Okay. All right. So one more time, to discuss what the terminology of my presentation is, I have to begin with what the word Occidentalism actually is, before I discuss how writers in the Arab world actually talked about it. When we talk about Occidentalism, most people actually have like an instant connection between Orientalism and Occidentalism. So the first thing you think about is probably Edward Said's book. However, I'm afraid Occidentalism, based on many writers and critics who have discussed it as a term, it's not really another side of a similar coin. It's quite different. When Edward Said talked about Orientalism, Orientalism was basically how the West saw the East. So he discussed all kinds of derogatory terminology that the West used while discussing the East. On the other hand, when we discuss today's presentation, you'll understand that with Occidentalism, it's Eastern representation of the West. Therefore, they do not follow the same pattern. Not all Easterners, or specifically Arabs, as we all know, see the West as a derogatory entity. A lot of people actually, a lot, and we encounter them every day, actually are in love with the West. They admire so many things about it, which was an element very much absent in Orientalism. While discussing Occidentalism, many writers actually disagreed on what the term should be. We start off with Zayane Shen, who was the first person to actually coin the term and discuss it. When she was discussing Asian representations of the West, Shen actually believed that it was a counter memory and a counter other to Said's Orientalism. So she started off by declaring it could be the other side of Orientalism. However, as the years passed and the discourse itself became expanded and people began to explore it, other definitions started to surface. So when we're talking, for example, about James Carrier actually, as you can see, quote, Occidentalism is neither rejected nor embraced the West outright, meaning there is no devoted love of the West and there is no devoted hatred towards the West. There is always something in between. We move on to something a bit, to be honest, I feel very much alike Occidentalism. When the two writers, Baruma and Margalit, discussed the term, they literally just made it coincide with hatred. As the title of their book, to be honest, I don't even feel that I need to explain their views. The title of the book just says it all. Occidentalism, the West in the eyes of its enemies. So just bluntly, right there, from the title, you can't judge the book by its cover, apparently. It's literally discussing Orientalism as how Easterners deflected the hatred to the Western other. Finally, we come to a very modern writer, not discussing Orientalism, sorry, Occidentalism generally, but discussing it in relation to Arab discourse and Arab consciousness. We have Rashid al-Inani. Rashid al-Inani discussed generally of Arab representations of the West in fiction specifically, and discussed how this image moved from one decade to another, which leads me to my following point. Why did the image we have of the West as Arabs always ever changing, decade by decade? Why is it always changing? To be honest, because I feel the Arab-Western relationship is very turbulent. It's not the kind of relationship that can remain static. The political milieu that goes around between the Arab world and the West is always politically charged. So even if we go way back, we go with the Islamic futuhat, we move on to the Crusades. And if we want to come to something more recent, 9/11, the Iraqi war, Syria, and it's going on up until this moment, this presentation is taking place. So if all of that turbulence happening politically, how can the image of the West be the same in the future? There is no way, to be honest. I've decided to take a very specific approach because Al-Inani, as we just mentioned, discussed generally how Arabs represented the West, of course, in different time periods. Today, I wanted to focus on Arab women because I feel the discourse itself, Occidentalism, was very male dominated. So the attention about how Arabs represented the West was mostly how Arab men represented the West. And I feel the answer is very easy. Why was it only men who wrote about the West? Honestly, because women didn't travel at the time. We're talking about late 19th century. Women were never given the space to actually travel for education, travel for tourism. That space was not allowed yet. So you'll notice most of the fiction, especially written at the time, or even travel logs, were mostly male dominated. These encounters of Arab men in the 19th century were always characterized, as Al-Inani said, by an enamorment. So when they went to the West, they appreciated the freedom, they appreciated the social side, the architecture. There was a general satisfaction with what the West was. What I want to do today is just to see, was this followed and confirmed by Arab women? Did they also extend this enamorment and love and enchantment of the Western other? Yes or no? So I've decided to actually discuss 3 points of views I felt were most dominating in Arab women's writings of the West. I felt that there were 3 main approaches that prevailed over and over by Arab women, starting 20th century and up until now in the 21st. I wanted to begin with the first encounters. So when the 20th century actually happened, when women started to actually travel to the West, I wanted to discuss this early encounter. What did the first women who went to the West think of it? Was it an instant love like the men that came before them? Or did they look at it from a different perspective? Another representation is how the West for women became a place of gender emancipation. That when in the Arab world, women did not feel always so easy to express themselves, the West became like the logical other where they can express themselves freely without being judged. And finally, the third approach I also felt was very much prevailing is that desperate need for the writer to balance her thoughts. How can I give a truthful representation of the West, what I really think about it, without being prejudiced, without only representing how my people and my country feels about it. I wanted to discuss that with all of these approaches. In each one of them, I'm going to discuss how the writer presented the West or the cultural other. And at the same time, how did she represent the Arab self? Did they always come hand in hand? When she praised the West, did she instantly disdain the self, the Arab self? So feeling badly about the Arab world, do I instantly praise the West and vice versa? So I want to begin now with the early female encounters. Of course, there are many, but one of the first was, sorry, her face is blocked, Leila Abouzeid. Leila Abouzeid, like many other women at her time, approached the West in terms of education. She went for a higher education and therefore wrote nonfiction, wrote travel logs about her encounters with the West. In her encounter, which she entitled Few Green Spikes, or in Arabic, بضع سنبلات خضر, I feel from the title itself, if you relate it to the Quran verse, you understand that there is some praise that coming out of it. That after years of drought, green spikes are finally up. So you get a feeling when you read the title, oh, Abouzeid is just like the male predecessors. She instantly will praise what people praised before her. However, I'm afraid there is a bit more complication in Abouzeid's encounter. For one simple reason, Abouzeid actually traveled to England at around the same time of the Arab-Israeli war in the 60s, 70s. So you understand the political charge at the time, the Nasirat atmosphere of nationalism. So when she went there, all of that background was in her mind. Therefore, her encounter was definitely not all enamored. Of course, she did praise certain elements of the West. For example, the British political, cultural, and social systems. In fact, in one of the chapters in her log, she actually entitled The Mother of All Democracies, England. So if this isn't praise for England, what is? The mother of all technologies, as in all other democracies were birthed by England. It's the mother. So obviously she continues with that idea of how the Western law system was flawless. On the other hand, as I said, she went with that Israeli Arab war in mind. So her encounter was not empty of some criticism. There is another chapter that she has in her book that she entitled Blisters in a Handsome Face. So obviously, one more time, the chapter is entitled with her emotion. England was the mother of all democracies. However, that pretty face still had blisters on it. It still had problems and still had issues. Namely, the one that she extensively wrote about was racism. That no matter how much you're enamored with the English and the British, they will never look at you as equals. She always thought there was always an inferior look that the British had for people from other ethnicities. In this atmosphere where the other or the cultural other for Abouzeid was both praised and criticized, where did the Arab self actually exist? What was the Arab self to her? Did she instantly criticize the self? Was she upset because the Arabs did not win that war? However, to be honest, even for myself, I felt Abouzeid's views were very much surprising. Abouzeid was actually growing up in a very well-off family. She had bilingual education her entire life. However, when she wrote this encounter, she specifically said, I meant to write it in Arabic. I never wanted to write it in English, even though she was very fluent. Here, the language to express a cultural matter becomes a weapon. Abouzeid actually consciously decided to use Arabic as a national weapon. I'm not following the other's language. I'm using my national language, my image, my culture to represent what I think of the West. So just to sum up her encounter, it's very politically charged, and the love she had for the West did not come with self-hatred either. We move on now to the other approach a lot of Arab women actually use to write the Western other, which is to write the West as a place for freedom and for female emancipation, that it's a place where women can actually express themselves freely. In here, I will discuss the Egyptian writer Abouzeid. I felt, to be honest, it's the perfect touch to add for that theme. Abouzeid, in a novel she entitled In the Eye of the Sun, wrote her fiction, obviously a novel, between London, Cairo, and America. So you get two countries to represent the other, and you also have a representation of the Egyptian self. So when you read her encounters in Cairo, you cannot but help that she's talking about her cultural self, Egypt. And in this discussion, she did it so well, Abouzeid, that her protagonist, Asya al-Ulama, a woman who's trying to pursue higher education, gets married in Cairo and decides to seek her higher education in the UK. So with her Egyptian husband, moves to the UK. And you will always notice that her encounters with her husband is really her encounters with Egypt. What she feels about the husband instantaneously becomes what she feels about Egypt. And of course, to be honest, with a very common cliche, Suwaif, as soon as her protagonist arrives to London, she picks up an English lover. And instantly, one more time, that man becomes a representation of the West. So she has two male relationships, one to reveal her relationship with her Arab self, and her other affair to reveal her relationship with the West. So to read these two encounters were fantastic. I also felt that people expected that the husband will be the despised character, the backward Arab man who knows nothing about women, and also that the Western man is the understanding man who gives her space to do whatever she wants. But Suwaif actually shocks you. It's not that clear-cut, great West, awful East mentality. When she speaks of her husband, honestly, yes, there is some sort of rigid sexual politics that come in relationship. When they are not, either one of them is satisfied in the marriage, but they're shy to even speak about it. She can't even express that she's not happy, and he isn't either. So you get that backward sense of sexual politics. And the question of, can women actually speak about sexuality in the Arab world? So I feel this is what Suwaif is actually doing. On the other hand, when we go to the British lover, at the beginning, such as the West, it seemed so good. The British lover gave her all this space to talk about what she wants, what she needs, and how can they improve their relationship. But at the end, the lover showed another side, as in the West showed her another side of it. It wasn't so great anymore. With time, the protagonist noticed that the British lover always wanted her to pose for him, wearing a concubine outfit, too much jewelries in it. He wanted her to be the prototype of Oriental women that he is attracted to. So she understood to him this was not a love relationship. He wanted her to fit an Oriental image, and she will never be more than that image. So this is perhaps how Abouzeid felt that the West looked at the East. No matter how much they showed that they respect us and care about us, there's always that level. Will they look at us as equals, or will they always see us as the Oriental backward part of the world? In terms of this representation of the Arab self and the Western other, I feel it is safe to say that the self, even though when the protagonists keep criticizing her Egyptian husband, this seems like an attack to the Arab self. On the other hand, at the end of the novel, the protagonist actually returns to Cairo happily. She returns to Cairo, ending her marriage to her Egyptian husband and ending her affair with her British lover, which means what? That finally she detached herself from all preconceived ideas. The Arab self is no longer backward to me. I'm going to reestablish myself with it. And the other is not so fascinating anymore. It's now discarded, and I know what the other is. I feel people most of the time wanted to believe that Arab women fell in love with the idea of emancipation of the West and only saw it like that. But Ahdaf Suwaif, which I admire her for, showed another side. It's not always that. It could be worse. The West could be worse, even for a woman who's sexually repressed in her homeland. We move on to, before I wrap up this section, I've just wanted to say, in terms of Ahdaf Suwaif, how did language serve her in terms of representing the other? How did she manipulate language to represent the cultural other? Honestly, I've wanted to read this out loud. I hope I can fill up the missing words though. She seemed, like many female writers, to be in a very problematic position when she is torn between two sides. Arab women a lot of the time find themselves torn. Do I write the truth? That the West, yes, did give me emancipation. Do I have to actually represent the West as something awful so the Arab self will feel happy with me? So if she says the West is great, Arab men will feel, okay, yeah, this is what Arab women want. You only care about that side of the West, so you fell in love with it instantly. On the other hand, if she hates the West, she's being untruthful to the actual experience she had. So this position to be torn between is not easy for an Arab woman writing sexual politics while representing a culturally different other. We move on to the last approach that Arab women have consistently followed in representing self and other, is the conscious awareness that before I put my pen to paper, I have to instantly think, before I write anything, how can I offer a balanced view? A fully love, not a fully hate. In this discussion, I'm talking about the Iraqi writer, An'am Kajaji, and also a form of novel. An'am actually shows us another new side of female representations of the West. Her protagonist here adds a new complication because she is an asylum seeker. So an Arab woman in the middle of the Iraqi war now seeks asylum in the West. So before anything begins, the West here is the savior. The West saved her from the war that was going back home. So when a writer like An'am Kajaji wants to introduce that theme, from the very beginning, she's aware that I have to be balanced, not only give the West the position of the hero. In this case, you will very much notice, I hope that I've had it, no, unfortunately, I only have it in memory, thank God. In An'am Kajaji, when talking about the self, the Iraqi self, she went to Paris to seek asylum, where the president met her. She took photos, everybody welcomed her, they gave her an apartment. So yes, West is hero. However, on the other hand, what happened to the self? The protagonist in the novel actually says, in many nights I can't sleep because I'm thirsty for Iraqi tea. And to be honest with the Iraqi tea, I don't know if you've had it. It's too bitter. Iraqi tea is not sweetened. It's black tea. And when I say black, I mean even with color. So when you taste it, it's quite bitter, just like the reality of the protagonist. However, when she goes to the West, she is thirsty for that tea. Bitter as it is, with the war that it has, it doesn't matter. the protagonist also has that Arab consciousness that she cannot detach herself from. Not because she's an asylum seeker, she instantly forgets her heritage. Therefore, this is the balanced representation that I feel Inham Kechachi was directed at. West as savior, but at the same time, Arab is the cultural savior as well. Generally, if I want to discuss Kechachi's representation in terms of the language she uses, I feel she was one of the most careful writers. She tried her best with the terminology that she uses to discuss the events of the novel to remove herself from totalizing images, that she always gives a holistic idea of the relationship between East and West. I've tried my absolute best to kind of wrap up, I don't know how many, I think like 30,000 words into that 30 minutes presentation. I hope that was clear. If the terminology of the presentation, Occidentalism, was clear. If you have any questions, please let me know. Very much. And to be honest, I still remember I've done this research, I think in 2010. To be honest, at the time, to Google a term like Occidentalism was close to nothing. Nothing was written on the matter. So to collect some books that had that word in it was very much challenging. And I feel that in the upcoming years, it will be as popular term as Orientalism. Because as we said, the encounter between especially the Middle East and the West is always charged. So the term will always keep developing itself. Yeah. To be honest, I'm going to draw personal experience to this. Growing up, I've read a lot of Western literature. So I've read Jane Austen, Virginia Woolf, and we go back to Shakespeare and blah, blah, blah. And I understood the literature. I can still relate myself to it. However, the literature that truly I feel changed me and resonated with me on a much deeper level was Arab literature. Because I know this woman lived in the same time, place as I did. So she now knows exactly the type of struggle that I've been going through. So I definitely believe that Arab literature or non-mainstream literature is very much underrated. Even if we honestly have been dabbling on African literature, and to honestly read about it from an African point of view is mind-blowing. We've read Africa in the heart of darkness. This is just wrong. So to read about Africa from an African writer opens your mind to a whole new horizon. And I'm hoping such representation by Arab women, such as the latter, will finally open up Western mentalities about Arabs and Arab women specifically. So yes, I hope so. Any other question? Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you've had something in your mind to leave with. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Sarah, for the wonderful presentation. And I'd like to invite you for the rest of the sessions. We have a session that starts shortly at 2:40. Thank you, and I hope to see you again.